Distinguished colleagues, you're welcome to this second edition of our highly engaging program, PR Power Launch Conversation. We want to thank those of you that joined us yesterday. Today, we would again be running both on Zoom and also live streaming on all the social media handles of the Nigerian Institute of Public Relations. We have a very special guest to share with us the result of yet another important study. And very happy to, at this point, invite the president of the Nigerian Institute of Public Relations, Dr. Ike Neleaku, fellow of the Institute, chairman and the president and chairman of the Governing Council, who will introduce this very important guest. But before the president comes on, let me introduce Professor Oke Okechukwu, vice chairman of the Education Advisory Board, who will be supporting me in this process and will indeed moderate the question and answer session. Professor Oke Okechukwu, can you please identify yourself so they know who to send the questions to?
Good morning, I'm here. Oh, good afternoon, rather.
Yes, it's afternoon now by 2 minutes. Let me inform participants that our house rule requires that you must put your video on when you are invited to speak. It's also very helpful and a sign of courtesy to other users when you keep your microphone muted until you're invited to speak. It's very nice when you also can raise your hand using the digital icon when you wish to speak. The moderator will appropriately recognize you. But I've realized too that it's more helpful when you use the chat button. That way, more people can actually share in the conversation. And so if you can post your questions now or at any point during the conversation, Professor Oke Okechukwu will equally read from the chat room. And I also want to thank you because you will not just remain attentive, but I believe that our special guest will want to hear from you in terms of feedback so that she is actually comforted that she communicated. So thank you very much and you're welcome. Mr. President, you may now take over the screen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, members of council, distinguished colleagues, and of course, my colleagues who are fellows of the Institute. It's my pleasure to welcome you again this afternoon to another round of engaging conversation. The NIPR Education Advisory Board has introduced this framework as part of capacity building and effective information content for our members. We believe that it's important to understand what is going on globally because we are building a platform for global competitiveness. This afternoon, we have one of leaders in the public relations industry across Africa. She works with one of the top 3 in the world in the area of public relations and communication, and that is Edelman. Edelman began a project known as Edelman Trust Barometer some years back. We had the opportunity of having listened to the presentation of this report a number of times at various APRA sessions. And I would like at this point to again express our profound thanks and appreciation to Chief Yomi Badejo Okusonya, fellow of the Nigerian Institute of Public Relations, immediate past chairman of APRA, for having introduced this dimension to APRA events, and indeed helping us to facilitate for our guest speaker this afternoon to share with us. Our guest speaker, Karina Pereira, is the CEO, Edelman Africa. She was with us at Côte d'Ivoire to present this report. Those of us that attended the event on your behalf saw very clearly the need to bring this home. We know that in 2021, 2022, the Nigerian Institute of Public Relations ran a national campaign tagged Citizen Summit for National Integration, Peace and Security. The theme of that campaign was reopen conversation, rebuild trust. Trust is a very essential element in managing communication. Trust is very fundamental in leadership. Trust is something you cannot do away with in governance. Trust is what separates the real leaders from other people who are taking advantage of what does not belong to them. And my dear colleagues, you will recall that we have since acknowledged that public relations is a leadership function. And if it's a leadership function, then trust becomes very important as an element. And Edelman has gone ahead to develop a barometer for measuring trust. And we want to benefit from this. So we are really grateful to Edelman for introducing this dynamic to the field of public relations. It is now my pleasure to welcome on stage our sister from the other side of Africa, Karina, to now present the 2024 Edelman Trust Barometer. Karina, we are happy to see you again and again. And remember, as we always tease you, all the other countries in Africa are gateways. Only one country is the destination. Nigeria remains the destination in Africa. So we send the beautiful weather of sunshine from Nigeria to you, even as your face is very, very, very bright and colorful. It's a pleasure to now yield the floor to you. Welcome, and please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you for the great introduction, and thanks to all of you for giving up the next sort of 40 minutes or so of your time to hear from us. Doctor, if you don't mind, can I share my screen? Will that?
Yes, please. Please go ahead and share. Vice President, I'm sure she can share her screen.
Certainly, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes, we had you. Great.
Gosh. I can't see, I'm not sure if I can see what you are seeing. Are you seeing full screen or?
We are not seeing full screen, but we see a part, aha, we can now see the full screen.
Ah, perfect. Okay, great. So thank you so much, and thanks again. Thank you for having me. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. And yes, you're absolutely right. I would love to hear from all of you on your perspectives. This is a report for Nigeria specifically, surveyed in Nigeria. And it would be really great to get your perspective on these results. Sometimes we sit very far from different markets, and although we're in the same continent, the realities are often very different. And I think it would be great to get some questions at the end, comments, and more feedback, as you say. So I think just to say, and you did cover a lot of the introduction, but just to say hello, first and foremost. I see there is a hand. I'm not sure if I should stop now.
No, please go ahead, ma. We will come to the audience.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. So I think just to add to that, and as was part of the introduction, my name is Karina Crera. I'm the CEO of Edelman Africa. As Edelman, we've been studying trust now for 24 years. And we really believe that trust is the most important currency that any institution can have with their stakeholders, as you mentioned earlier, for all of those reasons. And this morning, or this afternoon, what I'm going to do is take you through the findings of the 2024 Edelman Trust Barometer, which has now become the world's foremost study on trust. It looks at the levels of trust in the four main institutions in any given society, so that being business, government, NGOs, and the media. And it really analyzes what those levels of trust are telling us and the insights that we can use based on what's going on in our markets, and how we can use those insights to help our clients, to help broader society.
This meeting is being recorded.
Understand what's happening, and use those insights, especially for us in the communications community, to be able to make better decisions in terms of how we advise and counsel our clients in how to build trust. And our relationship with trust as Edelman goes much deeper than just having a study that comes through once a year. These reports are actually indicative of the state of satisfaction of societies. It highlights opportunities for institutions, for our clients, for them to consider ways to respond to some of these results and the challenges that may be that may come to the fore. So, being in the business of reputation management, we can see how a critical trust can be in advancing business objectives for companies, winning and keeping loyal customers, engaging better with employees, overcoming a crisis in the media. If you're a more trusted entity, you generally survive a crisis a little bit better in the media. So it's really important that we see the work in building trust capital with our clients, and we work with them every day to help them achieve these outcomes through our sort of proprietary methodology. We also know that trust can be the foundation for for better sort of political stability in a country, a better economic outlook, and overall having a much happier, healthier, and satisfied society. So we really do believe, as I say, that this is the most important currency that any institution can hold with its stakeholders. This particular barometer is now fielded in 28 countries on 6 continents. We've got an average of about 1,200 respondents per country, and this year's survey was actually fielded at the end of last year, so in the month of November. So bear that in mind as you see some of these statistics come up. What may have changed in the world, and the world is moving so quickly, there may be things that have changed that may not make much sense in terms of the result we're seeing. So just bear in mind when this was done. Okay, brilliant. So just to say that this year's report, more than anyone, I think, really follows a year of immense intersecting change. So we've seen a lot of conflict in the Middle East. We saw the election of a populist in Argentina, the unlocking of technologies such as ChatGPT that was becoming really popular, protests against climate mandates on one side and global climate commitments on the other. And there's really a feeling across societies around the world that we're on the precipice of maybe a new era, but not necessarily knowing what that looks like. In the nearly quarter century of research we've done on trust, there's 4 key themes that we believe have actually been crystallized in that time. So the first is kind of what we saw as the shift from authorities to peers. And peers, as we refer to them, as people like yourself or your friends and your family, people you would go to in your circle of influence. Then we saw emerging in 2016 what we call the mass class divide. This was really a divide in trust between the highest earning individuals and the lowest earning quartiles of respondents. Then we saw a battle for truth in 2021, and how mis and disinformation altered what we started to believe, and this really at the back of the COVID crisis. And then lastly, what we saw, which brings us to this year's theme, which we're calling innovation in peril. And this is not because of the technologies that we're seeing themselves, but it's how these technologies are actually being integrated into society, or not, as the case may mean. And what does that actually mean for society if we're not seeing technologies introduced, managed, and advanced in society, and what will be the outcome then? So we're in the midst of what we're calling, as part of this study, is a global referendum on innovation in society. So if we look at, for example, where we've seen lots of progress, how we then see that mirrored with a lot of pushback at the same time, which is really this referendum of how are people feeling about innovation generally. So, for example, we saw the COVID vaccine save millions of lives, but we saw many examples of backlash against the vaccine mandates. In the US particularly, we saw some significant legislation designed to incentivize the development of green infrastructure. But at the same time, we also saw some campaigning against electric vehicle transition. In 2023, millions of people logged on to ChatGPT. I'm sure you were one of them. And while Hollywood writers and actors were striking over the studio use of artificial intelligence in streaming and production technologies, that was kind of happening at the same time. And then in Dubai for COP28, we saw really the securing of a major agreement to transition away from fossil fuels. But in that same month, we also saw the Dutch Farmers' Party win an election in protest over green mandates that were actually being put on them and what that would mean for their livelihood and their business going forward. This year as well, we're seeing that half the world's population will participate in elections. And innovation is clearly becoming a political issue that in many cases is going to sway many votes for people and how they're thinking about the future of their society. So this year's Trust Barometer is designed to explore the forces that lead people to either refuse or embrace these innovations, to see them as progress or as a reason for potentially some backlash against that. So what I'm going to take you through now is what we think about what these forces will look like and what will ultimately lead society to accept or reject innovation. To begin, the decline of traditional establishment authorities really starts to mark a major shift for us. So here you can see our trust index. Our trust index is really the average of how much people trust their core institutions. So I mentioned those four institutions: NGOs, business, government, and media. And we can see here that when we have dark blue, we know that those countries are trusting or trusted, and that's for where they've received 60 points or above, and that we classify as trusted. Then you'll also see that 50%, between 50 and 59% is a lighter blue. That sort of is more kind of a neutral space. And in the red, you can see those are scores that really are in the red because they are seen as being scores of distrust. So anything under 49 represents distrust. And you'll see these same measures actually throughout the report to bear in mind what represents trust, neutrality, or distrust. What you can see here against is really interesting in where the different countries that we survey are actually appearing on this from last year to this year. What's great for Nigeria is that we're actually seeing Nigeria as largely very trusting. And you can see on the right-hand side where you've actually increased those 5 points from last year, where your results were showing more neutrality in levels of trust across your four institutions. This year, we're seeing quite a nice surge in that, where you've really moved to a position of trust, which is saying that on the average across your four institutions, you are feeling like there are quite high levels of trust in that institution, in those institutions. And again, it'll be great to get your perspectives on that at the end. What's interesting to see about this trust index is that developing countries are actually leading on those trust scores. There's not one G7 country that's actually in trust territory on this. Countries that are sitting in the blue space as you are. China, for example, continues to have really high trust levels, but remember, it's a sort of a single party state. So they also have a slightly different dynamic. But you can see that even their scores have declined 4 points in the last year because there's lots of questions around the situation of their economy at the moment. But really interesting, if you look at that red band at the bottom, some surprising markets to see in that space. The UK, Japan, Argentina, traditionally markets where you would have seen a lot higher levels of trust. Now, trust is actually informed by whether we believe an institution has both competence or is it that it's able to get things done, and ethics in actually doing what is right. So as you can see, we've got a bit of an imbalance in these levels of competence and ethics in Nigeria. And where you see the little Nigeria flag on the bottom left or underneath is where you know this is specifically a stat for Nigeria and not a global stat. So business and NGOs are really seen as highly competent and ethical. In the top right quadrant, you can see that they're almost off the charts there, which is really positive. And what this is saying is that society and those people that we spoke to, the respondents in our survey, really do feel that their NGOs and their business community are behaving in a really ethical way and are extremely competent in being able to get their jobs done, which is really positive. The media, just to the right of that, still seeing the media as an institution as being quite competent and ethical, but a little bit lower than NGOs and business. On the far bottom left, unfortunately, is where we see your levels of trust in government tracking, and unfortunately, the sort of least trusted institution of the four in Nigeria. But really what this shows us is just this imbalance. Now, in an ideal scenario, we'd want to make sure that your four institutions in a market actually have very similar levels of trust. That's probably the best we could hope for in terms of results. But this is showing us that for Nigeria, and we have a similar picture in South Africa as well, as do many markets around the world, where you've got this imbalance of how the institutions are actually faring on this map. And what we're also seeing is that our respondents are becoming increasingly skeptical of the institutional leaders themselves. And there is a worry that both government and business leaders, along with journalists, are purposefully trying to mislead us or say things that they know to be false. And this is a suspicion that's causing people to move away from trusting those authority figures alone, which often explains why there's a shift towards trust more to peers than traditional authority leaders. So important to just see these scores in terms of how people are actually feeling. These are quite high scores around leaders specifically in these areas where people aren't necessarily feeling that there's high levels of trust. And experts are trusted, but they're not the only credible voices. So when we ask people who they trust to tell the truth about innovation and new technologies, you can see there that someone like me or that peer group is actually sitting right at the top at 83 points, and that's closely followed by scientists. So what this is telling us is that we're seeking out expert voices, but today we're also listening to people who aren't necessarily scientists or skilled in science, but the information that we're getting from them is on a par with scientists. That could be something to watch as well, because when you're not sure the source of the information and you're trusting somebody who's telling you something, you've got to be very wary of whether it's fact-based, where the source is coming from. So just interesting to note as a trend, and especially for us as communicators, to be thinking about how do we also tap into more word of mouth opportunities to really share our clients' messages, to share the good work that we're doing and to help them build trust. It may be worth tapping into more sort of peer groups as audience choices. But you can see how someone like me and scientists are far more trusted than, for example, journalists or government leaders when it comes to actually telling people the truth. So when you've got a situation where you haven't got sort of trust in traditional institutions or the establishment leaders themselves, it's no surprise then that our respondents are actually feeling very vulnerable. So what's happening here is that we're seeing really personal economic fears for people that continue to be extremely high. You can see there on the left, 93% fearing job loss, and inflationary worries has actually gone up 7 points to 79%. But in addition to these personal economic fears and the state of the economy, this is also being married to what we're seeing as what we call sort of existential fears. This is where people have societal fears around things like climate change, around data security and privacy, geopolitical conflict and information insecurity. And what's interesting to note there with information war is that just fears over foreign attacks on the media has actually become something that our respondents are quite concerned about. And you can see where there's that little green circle, it shows there's statistical significance in the change year on year of how important that fear is becoming for people. So that's a really interesting thing to pay attention to, and also really important to understand how are people feeling psychologically in our societies, because that will also determine the kind of products they buy, the kind of decisions that they make, the kind of services they use. So it's really important just to bear in mind that overall people are feeling really fearful and anxious about their situation. And we need institutions to help implement innovations that will drive economic growth and address some of those societal challenges, because we know that that innovation is really going to be positive in the future. And here we can see that NGOs lead at 75 points as being the most trusted to integrate that innovation into society. Globally and on an average, it's business that's most trusted, but business is not far behind NGOs. I would say NGOs and business are the two institutions, if we look across the four, that are most trusted to actually integrate that innovation into society, so that it's felt to be safe, so that it's understood by the public, that people can really see and feel the benefits, and that they feel that it's accessible as well. And I think while there's broad trust in companies across the industry sectors, that trust doesn't necessarily carry over into the emerging innovations. So for example, here you can see while companies in the tech sector typically enjoy high trust, artificial intelligence is also bringing quite high levels of trust. So across energy and technology, we're seeing a similar scenario where there's high trust in the sector, and there's also high trust in the sector and the innovation, and in bringing that innovation to market. It's not exactly the same picture for healthcare, where we see lesser levels of trust in gene-based medicine as the innovation that will come in healthcare, and for food and beverage, particularly concerning that there's fairly high trust in the food and beverage sector overall. But in terms of genetically modified food and how people are thinking about food going forward, and health levels, etc., that's at very low levels of trust at the moment. So a lot of work to be done in thinking about how we would introduce an innovation like that into society. And throughout this report, you'll actually see that we're measuring attitudes, trust, and acceptance levels across these four different innovations. So when we talk about innovation, we're specifically looking at these four technologies, so as to make it easier, rather than just using innovation as a very broad term. So we focused on these four specifically to really represent the different types of technology sectors and stages in their life cycle. And the four technologies we analyzed certainly show different levels of acceptance as well. And the acceptance of innovation is so important in terms of how we can actually take things to market. So, for example, gene-based medicine and GMO foods are both at a real crossroads. At the top, you can see green energy. There's much more enthusiasm than there is rejection for that innovation right now. The same for AI. But the picture is slightly different again for gene-based medicine, and GMO foods particularly has far more rejection at this point in time in comparison to the levels of acceptance to the innovation. However, as you'll see, it's not just the acceptance of technology itself that's at stake. Our research shows that there's a strong link between technological and societal change, and that badly managed innovation will lead to broader societal backlash. In other words, if we don't do it properly, we won't actually see that technological and societal change that we're all hoping for to happen in our markets. So 2024 is a year with, as we said, 60 plus elections happening around the world. And whether literally or figuratively, voters are thinking about these things in terms of what their future economic prospects will look like, and what is the role that innovation is going to play in actually improving that for them. And in this referendum on innovation, institutions, unfortunately, what we're seeing are failing to do their part to give people the comfort that they need, that the implementation of these innovations are actually being properly managed. And here you can see is a global stat, and Nigeria actually mirrors that stat at a country level as well. You can see there 59% of people feel that government regulators lack the adequate understanding of emerging technologies to then be able to regulate them effectively. So it's not that there's no desire to help regulate them, it's just And as I say, you see the stat is actually shared across with Nigeria as well specifically. But let's start with government. The majority do not believe that government has the competence to regulate effectively. 59% agree that regulators lack adequate understanding, and this view holds true globally. So it's really positive to see that only around half of people are concerned that government has too much influence on science. And in many markets, what we see is that there is a very high level of influence from government in emerging technologies, and it becomes highly politicized. This doesn't appear to be the case just yet for these statistics for Nigeria, but important to keep an eye on as we look to maybe track them year on year. We're only seeing just less than half of people are worried that science has become politicized, and just over half feeling that government and organizations that fund research have too much influence. So I would say this is probably on the cusp, but something important to note, that there doesn't appear to be too much influence, so that it does start to become and feel sort of highly politicized. And here we can see that people are more likely to think that innovation is poorly managed than well in 24 of the 28 countries. The United States is the highest, with 56% seeing mismanagement of innovation. That's followed by Australia, Germany, and the UK. Argentina is the highest developing country on the list at 48%. The only exceptions, interestingly, for you are Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kenya. So 2 African and 2 Middle Eastern countries in which people are more likely to believe that innovation is actually well managed, more so than it is poorly managed. Although we still see about 1/4 to nearly a third who say the opposite. But it's really interesting to see that Nigeria is on the much more positive end of the spectrum. So there's obviously really great work happening in the country that's propelling things in the right direction. And there's a sense of positivity from society around that as well. But the consequences of this not being managed correctly are tangible. And first, there's an obvious impact on acceptance of the innovation themselves, so that when people feel that innovation is being managed poorly, they're more likely to resist it and they're less likely to embrace it. So respondents are ambivalent about these innovations. When they feel innovation is well managed, they're more likely to embrace and less likely to reject the innovation. For GMO foods, unlike the first 3 that you can see there, again, we see a similar picture to what we've seen before, where even if we see that the implementation is managed well, it doesn't actually convert into levels of trust for that particular innovation. So again, for those of us who have clients who are operating in this food and beverage sector and are thinking about and working with clients who have these challenges, it's really important to note those low levels of trust that we have to try and work and help them understand what is needed then to manage innovation better. When we're communicating about new innovations, when we're introducing them into society via media channels or whatever your choices are from a communications perspective, how do we help build that trust in that sector and those technologies specifically? And whether innovation is seen as implemented well or poorly has broader societal consequences too. And here we document what we call sort of an alienation effect. If you think innovation is being mismanaged, you're not only 12 points more likely to think that technology is changing quickly, but you're 11 points more likely to say that society is changing too quickly. And in both cases, the majority of these people feel that these changes are not just too fast, but also not good for people like them. So here you can see, and this is probably slightly lower, this gap or this trust deficit for Nigeria than it is for some of the other markets, but important to notice the distinction as well too. It's really important that people feel like they're brought on the journey, that they're part of the commentary, that they're part of the decision making, and they really are understanding the education aspect of these new technologies, because then they're much more likely to feel like they're part of the solution and that they can actually contribute to what they see as their future prospects as well. And the skepticism over innovation and the pace of change becomes suspicion of the system as a whole, unfortunately, which really puts things like fairness and capitalism itself into question. So 8 in 10 of those who think innovation is poorly managed believe that the system is biased in favor of the rich. And this is 18 points higher than the well-managed cohort, so those who believe that innovation is well-managed. And 49% say that capitalism as it's practiced today does more harm than good in the world, which is 10 points more than those who think innovations are being managed well. So again, you can just see how important it is when innovations are managed well. We want to make sure that people don't feel like their system is biased. They don't feel like there's inequality around that, and they don't believe that one section of society is more favored than the other. We've seen how the consequences of feeling that innovation is mismanaged also contributes to not just lower acceptance of those innovations, but also a greater sense that the system is biased, and capitalism can actually be really bad for society. And this is the new battlefront for trust, really, which is addressing this problem begins with a reset for how do we position science in society and how science operates in society. So it really begins with science because people believe that science should lead on the introduction of innovation. And we ask people who they believe should play a big role in managing the introduction of innovation. And you can see here by a big margin, scientists, along with technical experts and academics or teachers, are expected to take this role on. In communicators to think about who our people are. Who are those people from our clients that we put forward to tell the stories about the innovations that may be coming from a particular sector or a particular institution that you're working with? And really thinking about making sure you've got people who are factual, who are evidence-based, who are information accurate around the stories you want to tell, because it's really important. Not followed too far after as CEOs and leaders of multilaterals, and we'll get into that shared responsibility for business and government as we go through the next chapter. Science, transparent and accessible to the public. And I'm not sure if you had a similar concern to what we had during the COVID pandemic, was also not being sure, really who to believe, because, there was this clearly this novel sense of it. And unfortunately, as much as a lot of markets were actually using health professionals and scientists to talk to the public, I think we were all getting lost in what is true, what is not true. So that is the danger of also having scientists being the communicators, because there is a sense globally that scientists may be not sure how to communicate with the average person. That is not necessarily a sentiment shared in Nigeria, where you can see that stat is only at 37%. But it is something to take note of potentially when we make it as accessible as possible. And people aren't sure what to believe, that it's very clear and it's very accessible. And what's also complicating matters further today is that people are doing their own research. I'm sure this is something you can also relate to. And when we asked people where they were getting most of their information about new technologies and innovations, the most commonly cited channel was social media. What's interesting about this, though, is that when we think about media as an institution, social media is within that, but social media is the least trusted source of information. So despite the fact that people are going to social media for information, they're not necessarily trusting that information. So again, as we think about our choices of channels and where we want to share stories and communicate, social media for me is a big question mark, because it's really important, if we do use that channel, that we uphold the highest levels of integrity and ethics in what we're communicating. The second most relied on source is online. And this, again, I think also happened in the COVID pandemic, where people are going online and doing their own searches for information. They're not necessarily feeling like they've got good leadership, as you can see from earlier on. They're not sure who to trust amongst their leaders. So they're really going to go online and look for themselves. And again, not knowing how to discern between sort of really good and ethical sources versus not so good sources can be difficult in making sure people get the right information. And just as people feel empowered to do their own research, they also want to know that they can have influence. So they want to know that institutions will listen to their concerns and also give them a chance to ask questions. And this is where the "don't leave me behind" piece comes in. So we asked our respondents across each of the 4 institutions what would be important in earning trust. that would mean that you would feel that this institution is actually a good steward of change. They're trying to do the right thing. And across all four, the two key themes really there in Nigeria were, please, can you make sure that you are protecting our core values? And secondly, that you're ensuring our future prosperity is taken care of. Those were the two most important things that appeared as being top trust builders. So again, if you have clients in the business space, in the NGO space, in governments, it's really important that you think about how any communications coming from spokespeople within those areas are thinking about those two aspects as really being important to society. So in any communication, think about how do we send a message of prosperity, of future growth and innovation, but how do we also protect the core values that are so important as well to the people. And science must play an important role in society, as we see. So that's really building confidence, acceptance of an innovation, but that's also provided that regular people feel that they understand the science, that their concerns are heard, and that they have control over the impact of innovation on their lives. But what is the role for those other institutions? So when we're thinking about business, when we're thinking about NGOs, how do we restore trust in that promise of innovation? And because the Trust Barometer has been around for 24 years, we're able to look at long-term trends over time. So here's quite an interesting finding. Over the past decade, there's been a surge in the demand for a partnership between business and government. So we asked, if business partners with government, would you trust it more with technology-led changes? 60% globally said yes, that public-private partnership would give them more trust in business to lead on innovation. So that's a 15-point increase globally since 2015. And there's stunning increases in support for public-private partnerships around the world. So in both developed and developing markets. For Nigeria, unfortunately, we don't have a 10-year track record of data, but what's really positive is the result here is significantly also above the global average. So in Nigeria specifically, there's huge trust in the idea of business partnering with government, and really trusting that sort of partnership and that collaboration to make technology-led changes in society. Even in the US, where we've recently seen a backlash against the voice of business in society, there's an 8-point increase over the last decade. So this is certainly something that is shared around the world as being an important next step and a factor to consider in the broader innovation conversation. And what we can see is that where there's confidence that regulation is going to be effective, again, we can see a significant increase in how people are able to embrace each of these innovations. And you can see that across the map here of the dots, where people feel they have the confidence that each innovation is effectively regulated, they are much more likely then to embrace that innovation. And this means that business in general, and CEOs in particular, must focus not just on the invention and the introduction of an innovation, but also on managing the impact of that innovation on society. So here we ask people whether CEOs should manage change occurring in society, not just those occurring in their business. More than 6 in 10 people agree with that. And employees want to see the CEOs of their organizations take public stand on issues related to innovation. So things like, what do the job skills of the future look like? What is the ethical use of technology? What is the impact of what automation will mean on the jobs we have today, which, as you can imagine, also plays into people's fear around their economic prospects in the future. So these are things that CEOs and those of you who are working with CEOs as spokespeople, these are things that employees particularly want to hear from their own CEO, but in the broader public as well. It'd be really great to hear more from business on working on some of these challenges that are really at the root of the reason why people are worried to trust, particularly things like artificial intelligence and what that's going to mean. So just an important note to take note of here in terms of how CEOs can actually help to manage those changes occurring in society. And I think lastly, the convincing people of the promise of innovation and that it will lead to a better future is critical. And we saw how important that was when we looked at those big trust building activities from the institutions, so that people want to hear about a future, a really prosperous future. And this is going to be more than just simply selling a technology into society. We have to show people what those broad benefits are to them and to the society as a whole. So when you give people the sense of optimism about the progress that they can actually bring, they're much more likely to accept and embrace that innovation and not reject it. So it's really important, again, as communicators, if we're able to, is to show both the direct benefits of the specific innovation, but also the broader benefits. So AI is wonderful, ChatGPT is an amazing tool, but how is that actually going to benefit our society and our economy? How do we get people behind this? How do we get people understanding technologies, as an example, in the tech space, to really make them feel like this is going to bring them a better future? Because we can see from this research there's a direct correlation between how far society can advance if they're actually embracing these innovations or not, depending on which side of the fence they're on. And lastly, in summary, I know I've thrown a lot of sort of data points at you, just to say that these are kind of the 4 key points that I'd love you to remember out of this research, if anything. We live in a time where society is absorbing immense technological and societal changes all at once. And this is not unique to any particular markets around the world. And this can mean progress, or it can mean pushback if people are not ready for it, if they're not taken on the journey. So how do we ensure trust that innovation brings the promise of a better future? And how do we build the trust in these innovations so that people really want to be on the journey with us? So the top lesson here is that implementation is as important as invention. To really win people over, we have to explain the science and manage the impacts, and that's really critical to building trust. Secondly, while business is most trusted to manage the innovation, along with partners like the NGOs, to be competent and ethical, it can't go alone. So there's a big demand for that broader engagement. And you saw there how much across the world people are begging for better partnerships with government and CEOs that are needed to actually address those broader societal consequences. Things like impact on jobs, ethical concerns is a big concern for people. Thirdly, science will continue to be under public scrutiny. So we have to find ways to better explain science, make sure there's engagement and dialogue, that we're harnessing peer voices. Remember, I mentioned the word of mouth, and addressing the challenges of misinformation as well. It's really critical to building trust in society. And then lastly, point number 4, people really need to feel like the future is in their control, that they're optimistic about it, and that they can have an influence in what happens in their future. It can't be something that simply happens to them. So it's really important, again, that we encourage our clients and the work that we do as well to listen for people's concerns, be open to questions, innovation, and with it, our sort of collective future is on the ballot from a voting perspective, and everybody really does deserve a vote in that, if nothing else. So thank you very much. That's it from me.
Well, thank you so much, Karina. We really appreciate the very, very, very rewarding insight you have given us. It tells us that we still have a lot more to take from the main report. And so we would, of course, be uploading that report when we get it from you on the website, so our members would look at the details, especially that you carefully presented to us, particularly the segments that have impact on what we're doing here in Nigeria. Thank you very much indeed. Let me invite Dr. Tokwe Ojeme to moderate the question and answer sessions. Our immediate past president of APRA will give us the vote of thanks. And of course, thereafter, the president and chairman of council will close the meeting. Dr. Ojeme, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Very, very distinguished guest speaker today, Mr. President and Chairman of Council, and
the recording has stopped.
PR practitioners, members, and everyone here. We've learned today from the lunch served. It's a lunch with everything in it as served so well by our guest speaker. Building trust is important. Better partnership. We need to ensure we understand science, and then the future will be right on our hands. Thank you very much once again, Karina Crera. This was indeed wonderful. So we take questions right now. And if you have a question, please raise your electronic hand. First on the list is a lady of excellence. Welcome, a very distinguished Nkechi Ali Balogun. Please ask your question. And please tell us your name, where you are asking from, and then straight to your question. We need your video to be on, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very, very much. I am a very noisy place. I hope it's not affecting the audio. My name is Nkechi Ali Balogun, the founder and convener of NIPR Roundtable, which Zondi, Pumelelo, and Karin, attended 2 years ago. I want to commend Karin for such a very detailed and comprehensive, very impactful. And I also want to commend NIPR. This is a very powerful way of having lunch. Maybe this is one of the innovations we're talking about. Well done. Now, my challenge here, or my fear, is about population. There's a lot of talk being on trust, innovations, including AI. And so when you say that a country like Nigeria is managing AI, it's managing innovations very well. First of all, I want to know about the population sampling so that we know how authentic these surveys are, so that it doesn't become a mere statistic. And secondly, what aspects of innovations are you talking about? Because AI is like a new thing in Nigeria. Okay, we are just beginning to understand it. Okay, so what aspects of innovations are you talking about so that we know how well we are managing it? And again, that takes me back to your population sample so that we know how authentic and how impactful some of these findings could be in our everyday administration of events. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take 2 questions, and then our guest speaker will be able to answer. The next one comes from a distinguished council member. Please welcome to ask her question, Ms. Olubunmi Badijo. Please, your name and where you're joining from.
Yes, thank you. My name is Mrs. Olubunmi Badijo.
We need your camera on, ma'am. Your camera is on.
Yes, a fellow of the Institute.
Dr. Jimmy.
Are you still there? Are you still there?
If our network is poor, we can move to the next person so that we can manage time, please.
All right. All right. Thank you very much, sir. And just as the president mentioned, we have just about 3 minutes more. So quickly, I invite Mr. Chijioke to ask his question. Mr. Chijioke Obioma, please quickly unmute, show your camera so we can see your face, and then ask your question. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to the president and to our distinguished speaker. Very insightful presentation. I just want to ask a question on ethics. In your 24 years of undergoing this study and presenting this of having to deal with influence, external influence, because I believe that these reports will in a way influence policies and investments and all of that in different countries and organizations. So how do you deal with external influence trying to, tilt the data to favor them and all of that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. If fellow Olubunmi Badijo is there now, can you quickly ask your question, ma'am? I see
very much. I would like to commend the Karen that wonderful and interesting. For me, it's a very good, very rich one. The issue of trust is cardinal and it's very important. So I think to that extent, the world will benefit from that report. Let me just comment on the issue of mismanagement of innovations. I'm glad to know that Nigeria is one of those well in managing innovations. But I also think PR professionals can that's mismanagement of innovations. Secondly, specifically, how can PR professionals, scientists, effectively communicate their findings and innovations? We have a deficit in that area, and I think we need, as professionals, to start thinking of in that area. There's really a job, a duty for PR professionals to help change the narrative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Karen, it's all yours now. Take it away.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for the question. Nkechi, good to see you again. So just in terms of the sampling, and that it does vary from country to town, specifically for Nigeria. But just to say that our Edelman Trust Institute conducts the research themselves. So they are an independent research house. Yes, we use them as Edelman, but their data is very, very robust and representative wherever they use it. They make sure of that. So that is why we can never replicate a trust barometer with anybody else, because it has to be done a certain way with them. So it's an annual survey that's done online. There's about 32,000 respondents globally, and there's approximately 1,200 respondents per country. That goes up or down depending on the size. And that's why I say from a representative perspective, they always make sure that there's statistical relevance. But I can give you the exact number for Nigeria. I can follow up with them for that if you would like that. And then what they do then is, unless otherwise indicated, the global averages are composed of all of the 28 countries. And for throughout the report, the question text is edited for readability. So when you go through the report, you can also see at the bottom of each of those data points what question has been asked to get the response that you're seeing on the slide as well. So that's also useful in checking the validity around that, and just making sure some questions are answered on a 4-point scale, some questions are answered as a yes or no, but that will give you a much better sense of the data that we've been using. And this data has been, and our Trust Barometer is cited in many academic journals around the world and has been for many, many years, as you can see, the 24 years we've been studying. So we haven't yet managed to find anybody who's been able to find any sort of issues with the data, but I'd love to hear back from you when I share the detail. So the sampling is incredibly important, and we do take that very seriously. And then just to say, in terms of the different technologies, what we have looked at specifically there, as I said before, in the green energy space, it's things around biofuels, hydrogen, wind, solar, other sort of renewable sources of energy. In the technology space, artificial intelligence, which I think most of us understand at a basic level as using tools like ChatGPT, etc., is probably the furthest in terms of the innovation that we can understand. But technically, what we're testing there is things like machine learning, natural language processing, and generative AI, which is the tools that we're referring to. The gene-based medicine looks at vaccines, gene splicing, gene therapy, and in food space, it's around genetically modified foods, pest-resistant crops, and faster-growing fish, and all of those things. So Yes, it's a broader scope against each of those technologies, but those are where we are seeing most of the innovations come through at the moment. Secondly, and I'm aware of time, so I'll hurry up, ethics and the influence on ethics. It's really difficult. We haven't seen anybody abuse this data to be in their favor. It's really hard to do that, especially when you have real data points that tell a different story. I think we obviously do experience in some countries where we have quite low scores of trust for government. The governments don't want to hear that. It's not particularly positive message for them. But the way that we always think about that is that there's opportunity for growth and development and improvement. So we don't come at it from an angle of saying that it's a criticism of any particular institution. I think it's just about being, how do we then take the learnings and work together to make sure we're creating a better balance across those institutions. And as I say, I haven't seen anybody abuse the data yet. If it's out there, it would be disappointing. But mostly not. It's been used for the right things. And then lastly, and I'm not sure if I caught all of the question, but just to say around mismanagement of innovation and kind of how we think about that, it's really just working with our clients better, working with other stakeholders who are trying to do better in society. And as we said, it's implementation is just as important as the invention. I think a lot of about how amazing an invention is, but are we really talking to what matters most for people, which is how will this affect their lives? How will they get involved? How will they use it? And how will it affect their future? And I think those are the things we need to focus on. And we have to give people that sense of control over their future. I hope I answered that okay. I didn't catch the whole question.
All right, thank you very much. With that, that's the much we'll be able to take. If we have other questions, please feel free to send to the Secretariat. And I'm sure it will be sent to Karen, and we'll probably get you electronic answers. I'll yield the floor to the Vice President. Mr. Vice President, it's back to you, sir.
The Vice President has stepped out to attend to something. So may I call on Chief Yomi Badejo Okusonia to graciously give us his, you are looking very, very senatorial, Yomi.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you for anything less. And we, as the Nigerian Institute of Public Relations, we're very pleased, or we're very proud to be associated with you. We look at this as the beginning of many, many more. We would like, and I speak, I believe, on behalf of the President, that we must reserve a slot for us every year for when this Trust Barometer comes out, so that you would have a special presentation for Nigeria. Thank you for you and your team. Say hello to Chloe and the others for working with us to make sure this happens. God bless. And speak to you later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President Emeritus of APRA. Thank you, council members who are with us this afternoon. Thank you, Karina, for being with us. You know that in Nigeria, you have a partner in NIPR in doing this. So Yomi has said it all. We hope to have a more robust engagement next year. Just to say that for today, we had about 108 people join this presentation online, and we had 275 that joined on the live streaming, 275. So that's about 400. And I think it's very exciting. Let us know anytime you have something else that you think that NIPR should benefit from. We want to ensure that we take advantage of every opportunity to build capacity for members of the Institute. It is part of what the current Governing Council is doing to ensure that we give our members the best that is available in the industry. On that note, I want to thank my colleagues from all over the country, and even those that joined from outside the country. We want to thank all of you for finding the time. We don't want you to have the time or miss the time that you need to get back to the office. That's why we reserved it for this time, 12 to 1. And on that note, we will call it a day. Look forward to the next in the series of Power Power Launch Conversation, and stay blessed. Karen Arada, please help us to have a full version of so that we can upload it to NIPR for their application. I already know 4 areas that I'm going to deepen what you have done to get today. Remember, implementation important partnership.
Thank you, President.
Thank you, Karin. I hope to speak with you again.
Bye. Thank you. Nice one.
Thank you, everybody.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam.